Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Paul Graney, in for Tiffany Meyer. Our top story tonight. Is the U.S. prepared for a modern war? In preparation for a potential future conflict with China, the Pentagon is racing to stockpile missiles, planning to double, even quadruple production. A China-based drone maker with ties to the Chinese military losing its challenge in a U.S. court and staying on the Pentagon's blacklist. Philadelphia's mayor planning to raise the Chinese Communist Party flag at City Hall this Tuesday. Pressure mounting to call it off. Chinese labs testing over 70% of electronics entering the U.S. for security risks. Many are state-controlled, raising national security concerns. What the FCC is doing to close the loophole. And the tiny gap raising huge stakes. NVIDIA's CEO claiming China is just nanoseconds behind the U.S. in chip making. The latest in the global AI race. A rare sight on the world stage. Russia's Vladimir Putin, North Korea's Kim Jong-un, and China's Xi Jinping appeared together at a recent military parade in Beijing's Tiananmen Square. Since then, tensions between the East and West have worsened. Now, could rising tensions spark a direct conflict between the United States and China? And what do the Pentagon's quiet preparations reveal about how close we are to a potential flashpoint? Let's dive in. Earlier this year, U.S. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth declared that the United States is prepared to go to war with China. But the question is, does Washington have enough weapons for a potential conflict with China? After more than 3 years of supplying weapons to Ukraine and continuing support for Israel's war against Hamas, American stockpiles are running low. Meanwhile, China has been rapidly building its arsenal, especially in missiles and nuclear weapons. Now, the Pentagon is ramping up its production, urging suppliers to double, even quadruple, missile output. Top priority is the Patriot Interceptor, one of America's most advanced air defense systems. According to the Wall Street Journal, the Pentagon is now ramping up building 12 critical weapons, from long-range anti-ship missiles to joint air-to-surface standoff missiles. Earlier this month, Hegseth spoke with his Chinese counterpart. He made it clear that the U.S. has vital interests in the Asia-Pacific and will protect them. Before visiting Guam in March, Hegseth circulated a classified memo urging full readiness for a potential war with China over Taiwan. The democratic island has long been coveted by Beijing's authoritarian regime. A new report from a British think tank says Russia is already helping China prepare for a possible Taiwan invasion. The assistance includes supplying high-altitude parachute systems. It also involves training Chinese troops in live combat scenarios. This Tuesday, Hegseth will meet with top U.S. military leaders in Virginia, where he'll be emphasizing what he calls the warrior ethos. President Trump is expected to attend. And a Chinese-based drone maker continues to be labeled as tied to the Chinese military. DJI will remain on the Pentagon's blacklist of companies tied to Beijing's military, so that means it's barred from contracting with several federal agencies. A federal judge in Washington, D.C. has dismissed DJI's lawsuit challenging the designation. Here's a closer look.
District Judge Paul Freeman ruled that the Pentagon's finding that DJI contributes to China's defense industrial base is backed by substantial evidence. He added that the company technology has both substantial theoretical and actual military applications. DJI is a private company headquartered in Shenzhen. It sells more than half of all commercial drones in the U.S. The firm sued the Pentagon in October 2024 after it was placed on the list of Chinese military companies operating in the United States. The DJI called the designation unlawful and misguided, saying it is neither owned nor controlled by the China's military.
DJI doesn't make military drones, but U.S. lawmakers warn that Chinese-made civil drones could still pose a national security threat if Beijing forced backdoors into the products used here in the U.S. And Philadelphia's mayor is facing mounting calls to cancel plans to raise the Chinese Communist Party flag on Tuesday. Now, the chairman of the Congressional Select Committee on the CCP is warning against the city raising the flag, saying it should not allow itself to be exploited as a tool for CCP propaganda. Now let's zoom in.
Chairman John Molinar is the latest critic of Philadelphia's plans to acknowledge the Chinese regime. Writing to the city's mayor, he warned the upcoming flag ceremony will send the wrong message about America's values. Spelling out the major issues, he wrote that the CCP represents a regime that is persecuting spiritual people of all faiths, noting the regime's role in the fentanyl crisis that's killing millions of Americans. He's the latest among several critics. Author Gordon Chong asked, "Where are our ideals? Have we become so corrupt?" Philadelphia State Senator Doug Mastriano called to stop what he calls the political correctness.
Let's stop being politically correct here and say no to raising a flag over our city here that oppresses people, throws Christians in jails, takes out organs of people in prison, who persecutes minorities, and it needs to stop.
Chairman Molinar wrote, "To cancel the PRC flag-raising ceremony will not only demonstrate that the local government in the United States stands for U.S. values and national interests, but that it stands in support for the people of China, who face the regime's ruthless oppression and transnational repression." Molinar also used the opportunity to spotlight the harmful impacts of Philadelphia's sister city relationship with the regime, warning these relationships are used to promote CCP interests and use transnational repression efforts to silence Beijing's critics. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
And Rushan Abbas, executive director for the Campaign for Uyghurs, also urged Philadelphia's mayor not to raise the flag. She said in a letter, quote, "The red flag of communist China is not a symbol of culture or unity. It is a banner of a totalitarian regime." Abbas's sister was sentenced to 20 years in prison in China because of Abbas's advocacy here in the U.S. And over 70% of U.S. electronics imports are tested in labs in China before reaching America. Now, the FCC is taking action to close this critical U.S. security loophole. Last week, the Federal Communications Commission refused to grant 4 Chinese labs the qualifications to review and approve electronics for sale here in America. Electronics like smartphones, computers, even baby monitors must be reviewed and tested to ensure they don't pose security threats before entering the U.S. Right now, Chinese labs are handling most of this testing, covering over 70% of all electronics for sale here in America. Now, the FCC previously allowed a Huawei lab to test and review its own gear before it was imported into the U.S. Washington has warned that Huawei equipment could act as a Trojan horse for Chinese intelligence, and since May, the FCC has been working to close the security loophole. Earlier this month, it pulled the qualifications of 7 Chinese labs. Officials have been raising alarms about Chinese risks tied to Chinese-made electronics. One example is TP-Link, one of the best-selling Wi-Fi routers at Best Buy. Experts and lawmakers now urging Americans to ditch these routers, saying they could give China backdoor access to data and even allow it to disrupt U.S. communications.
Concern is the Chinese cyber operations need to come all the way from China out to their victims in the U.S., the critical infrastructure inside the U.S. And most of our cyber defenders know that when something knocks on their front digital door from China, they need to look at it very closely. But by hacking these Wi-Fi routers, they can come through the internet, emerge in our homes and our businesses, and then move onward to those targets and have a much better reputation because it looks like work from home, or it looks like the connections they would expect from their customers. So they can't block those.
Joyce says using these routers at home opens U.S. critical infrastructure to attack. NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang says China is just nanoseconds behind the United States in chip-making technology. He points to China's grueling work culture and says its tech industry is racing ahead with fewer rules slowing it down. Speaking on a recent podcast, Huang said letting companies like NVIDIA sell chips in China helps spread U.S. technology and extend American influence. He also made clear what the U.S. is up against.
We're up against a formidable, innovative, hungry, fast-moving, under-regulated. Yeah. Okay, people don't realize this. They are very lightly regulated.
Huang's comments come as NVIDIA resumes shipments of its H20 AI chips to China following a pause tied to U.S. export rules. The Commerce Department began issuing licenses for those chip exports back in August. NVIDIA is also developing a new chip designed to comply with U.S. export restrictions while offering better performance. Meanwhile, China is racing to build its own chip industry. Chinese tech giants like Alibaba, Tencent, and ByteDance are investing in domestic chips, either building in-house or funding startups to develop them. Tencent says it already has adjusted its infrastructure to run on homegrown chips. President Trump has announced new tariffs aimed at industries that undercut the U.S. This time he's going after the film industry, announcing a full tariff on movies made overseas. In a post on Truth Social Monday, Trump said, quote, "Our movie-making business has been stolen from the United States by other countries." To fight back, he announced a 100% tariff on any film produced outside the U.S. Back in May, he called foreign productions a national security threat, saying they not only lure filmmakers abroad, but also bring in foreign messaging and propaganda. Trump warned the American movie industry is dying a very fast death as other countries offer incentives to draw studios away. This latest tariff is part of a string of recent trade moves. Last week, Trump unveiled a 100% tariff on branded or patented pharmaceuticals imports. But any company already building a U.S. plant won't have to pay the tariff. On top of that, he also proposed up to 50% tariff on furniture imports. Official data shows U.S. furniture and wood product jobs have been cut in half since 2000, and in 2024, roughly 60% of furniture imports came from Vietnam and China. These tariffs are aimed at curbing imports and boosting incentives for American-made products. And still to come, a Chinese city collecting blood samples from all adult males, sparking fear among Chinese residents. A closer look at the controversy. And Florida taking action to fight the influence of the Chinese Communist Party. Attorney General James Uthmeier weighing in on Americans' data being handed to Beijing and on military-aged Chinese men crossing the border.
China is our greatest adversary, and if we are showing them the playbook for how we think, how we function, how we operate, then our next generation is not going to be prepared to combat our enemy.
More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Paul Graney. Next, we zoom in on a city in China's Inner Mongolia. Local police are carrying out a mass collection of blood samples from all adult men. The move has shocked people all across China, with many questioning whether collecting sensitive data from such a large group is allowed and why authorities are doing it. NTD's Flora Hua has more on the story.
Mass blood sample collection is underway in Zilinghat, a city in northern China's Inner Mongolia. Authorities say all males aged 18 to 45 are required to participate, adding they must not miss anyone. The collection effort has been ongoing for almost a month. Collected samples will be documented in a local DNA bank and linked to the owner's IDs and passports. City officials claim the campaign is aimed at tracking missing vulnerable populations such as seniors and minors. Some medical experts in China speculate the sampling could be linked to solving past criminal cases. But the collection appears to go further. Residents told Chinese media that authorities are also gathering family medical histories and information on at least 3 generations. The news is sending chills across China. Many people are voicing concerns online about growing state surveillance. Some are even questioning whether the collection could secretly be used to identify organ donors for patients. Concerns over state-sanctioned organ transplants in China have drawn attention in the U.S. Pennsylvania State Senator Doug Mastriano recently spoke out while opposing the raising of a Chinese regime flag in Philadelphia.
Stop being politically correct here and say no to raising a flag over our city here that oppresses people, throws Christians in jails, takes out organs of people in prison, persecutes minorities, and it needs to stop.
The Chinese regime has long faced accusations of carrying out state-sanctioned live organ harvesting across the country. International rights groups say Falun Gong practitioners are the primary targets. Falun Gong, also known as Falun Dafa, is a spiritual discipline that has been brutally persecuted by the Chinese Communist Party in China since 1999. Flora Hua, NTD News.
And Florida is set to investigate a lot of companies that are tied to the Chinese Communist Party and how they obtain and transfer the data of Americans back to Beijing. James Utmeyer, Florida Attorney General, sat down with American Thought Leaders host Jan Jekielek to explain why it's vital to fight the CCP influence in the state.
I wanted to start with looking at, you're going after some of these surveillance systems that are being basically installed in cameras and other monitoring devices that are being, in hospitals, at homes, and security systems, very kind of invasive stuff. Just give me a little bit of a background of how you kind of came into starting to make these investigations in Florida.
Well, we're going to be investigating a lot of companies. What we've come to realize is that the CCP, or an entity that's clearly tied to the CCP or the Chinese military, is obtaining the data of Americans through many companies out there that they either own or there's a parent company that is sharing that data. So in Florida, the most recent investigation we launched was into a company, Lorex. They make in-home or in-business cameras, everything from baby cams to nanny cams, doorbell cameras. I mean, they capture the imagery of everything people are doing at home, and consumers do not know about it. That then gets handed over, and Lord knows what happens then. So at the least, consumers should be put on notice by these companies that their data is being handed to one of our, if not our greatest adversary, which is a huge national security risk. But that data probably should not legally be allowed to leave the United States in the first place. So we first, came into knowledge that healthcare tracking data, devices that that measure your vitals in hospitals were handing over data to the CCP. Now we've heard about Lorex. There's several other companies we're looking at, and at the end of the day, we want to combat all of it because I think it's dangerous.
A lot of people don't know that in China they have something called the National Intelligence Law, and the National Intelligence Law basically requires individuals and companies that are under the auspices of the Chinese Communist Party, which is everybody in the country or outside the country that's from the country, they're required to spy, provide data, essentially the gamut of things. Right. And at the same time, it's actually illegal for them to disclose that they're doing so. Right? So there's this bizarre legal dimension. I was thinking, you would think they might hide, because they could do all this with kind of hiding it, but they actually made it the law over there.
Right. Yeah, I think they have every intention in the world to gather as much information as possible. The leaders of our country, I think they're aware of some of it. I don't think they know the full extent, but at the end of the day, China is our greatest adversary, and if we are showing them the playbook for how we think, how we function, how we operate, then our next generation is not going to be prepared to combat our enemy.
And one of the things I appreciate is that even as you're starting some of these investigations, you're making Floridians, and I suppose other Americans like myself, or actually Canadians living in America, hopefully soon to be Americans, just aware that this is happening. And I think you mentioned this, and this is such a critical part of the picture. Like, we're still not fully aware of the gravity of the scale of it all. Right.
Well, there's so much evil and danger in the world that I think, we lose sight of how dangerous China is. China is our #1 enemy. And with trouble in the Middle East, with economic issues, with the open border. It's easy for us to get distracted in other ways. But the reality is China is trying to harm us in every one of those avenues, whether it's subsidizing products so they can sell them below the cost of our manufacturers to make them here and then ultimately drive up prices and hurt our industry, whether it's flooding fentanyl into the country through the open border crisis, whether it's stealing data through one of these avenues that we are investigating. China is learning, they're patient, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to get the upper hand. So we're going to combat. I mean, the AG's office in Florida, we have our own limited sovereignty and limited jurisdiction, but we still see these very dangerous harms, and we're going to fight them.
During the time when there were these record numbers of people coming through the border, there were multiple reports of, let's say, disproportionate amounts of military-aged males without families. I was, my awareness was heightened around Chinese nationals of this nature. There's people that have told me that there's likely cells of all kinds of adversaries, whether they're terror organizations. We actually know that Hezbollah has cells. That's kind of fact. We know that factually, but really, these people have been doing their best to lay incredibly low.
Yeah.
But I imagine that there's some thought being given on how to deal with that reality, and not just at the federal level.
Yeah, I mean, look, you've got a lot of these people that are military-age men. They are committing crimes in the country beyond just being here illegally. And so people get nervous, are we just going to deport these people, back to a Central or South American country that might change over leadership in a year or two, and then they all, get released and they flood back to the United States. And that's a very legitimate worry. But what we're trying to make sure Americans understand is, especially in Florida, we are going to arrest people and hold them for the term in our prison system, and then deport them. So if they commit a serious crime, if they sexually abuse somebody, they're going to spend the rest of their life in our state jail system. We are not going to let them go to El Salvador, where maybe in 7-8 years they get released and come right back into our country. I think it's also important that people know it's not just Central and South Americans that are illegally coming into our country. We've had numerous busts in Florida where we pull over a large vehicle and we find a dozen people from China that have illegally come into the country, or Middle Eastern countries. So the open border problem was broad. The left would like you to believe that it's all a bunch of well-intended families that just want a better life. And yes, there are certainly some people that want to come into this country for the right reason. And we should love them, we should pray for them, but they need to do it the lawful way, the right way. People that come in the wrong way need to be held accountable, and we're going to do that.
And to watch the full episode, visit American Thought Leaders with Yanni Kellick on the Epoch Times. And that's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Paul Greeny. If you have any feedback on the show, maybe you'd like to see us cover something in particular, just send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. And for round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you soon.